Imagine spending your entire day lifting weights, only to return home completely drained, with your only source of joy being a virtual reality game. This game promises that whoever completes it will earn limitless wealth. Finally, after beating the game, over $1 million lands in his bank account. He goes to sleep content, but upon waking, he discovers that monsters have invaded the world. The game has turned into reality, and he is the only one who knows everything about it. Determined, he sets out to hack the system. The story begins on a bright morning under clear skies. Someone is seen wearing virtual reality glasses, breathing heavily and drenched in sweat. Within the game, they are congratulated for completing the final test as the sole player to finish it. Overjoyed, they ask if they've truly completed everything, while a pixelated game screen appears. Someone mentions a scam game. They explain that this is what Prophecy Online, the VR game, was often called. It was a highly advanced VR experience, immersive, action-packed, and compatible with resolutions as high as 16K. It was an open-world online RPG where players could feel, smell, and hear everything. This was Prophecy Online. The game promised a reward of infinite wealth that couldn't be spent even in 1,000 years. At first, no one believed such claims. He admits he was one of the skeptics, playing the game casually while ignoring its money-grabbing aspects. But Endo recalls that everything changed that day. He remembers someone at his job telling the team to take a break. It was an ordinary day at work. He asked if they'd be clearing debris that afternoon. After struggling to find stable work, he had taken a part-time job as a construction worker, stuck in a monotonous cycle of toiling under the hot sun and enduring scolding from older coworkers. Suddenly, Endo received a message on his phone from the Prophecy Online administration. Surprised, he noticed it was related to the game and wondered if he had forgotten to disable email notifications. The message congratulated him for achieving first place in the beta test and informed him that the reward would be deposited into his account. Smiling, Endo doubted its legitimacy, assuming it was just another scam email. Still, he decided to check his account. As he looked at his phone, he thought it was impossible for anything to be deposited. To his shock, he found 1 million yen in his account. Just then, a coworker approached him, asking for his help after the break. Concerned, the man touched his shoulder and asked if he was feeling okay. Without a word, Endo suddenly bolted, laughing uncontrollably, leaving his colleague bewildered and calling after him. Running with hope, Endo wondered if this was real, if he could genuinely make money from the game. He questioned whether the promise of a reward so vast it couldn't be spent in 10,000 years could actually be true, spurring him to dive headfirst into the opportunity. The game was merciless and unforgiving, treating its players as expendable sacrifices. The tower's guardian would erase defeated players along with their data. In the dungeon, the tower's exit was always randomized, and the most harrowing part of the experience was the physical pain inflicted on players when their characters were injured. This constant confrontation with the fear of death caused many to quit. Yui barely managed to cover his living expenses through a part-time job. To continue playing, he fell into debt, taking out loans from both banks and loan sharks. Now, he had no choice but to wait for the promised unlimited assets that supposedly couldn't be exhausted in 10,000 years. When he finally completed the game, he was greeted with a simple congratulatory message, stating that his true reward was the experience. Exhausted, he began removing his VR headset, incredulous that he had actually finished it. Dropping everything, he grabbed his phone, desperate for the promised reward. Opening the email from the Prophecy Online team, he read that they had recently achieved their goal and, as a result, the game would be discontinued. Angry, Endo wondered what would happen to his reward while skimming through the message thanking the game's sponsors. Feeling sick, he dropped his phone, which shattered as it hit the floor. Kneeling, he questioned whether he would ever receive the reward he had been promised. The day remained sunny, and the neighborhood peaceful, as if his despair meant nothing to the world. Trying to console himself, he reasoned that a large sum of money might take time to process. Exhausted, he collapsed onto his bed, deciding he would check again the next day. The following morning, checking his phone, he found no updates beyond the initial deposit of 1 million yen. Admitting defeat, he regretted not giving up sooner. A week later, he was startled awake by a loud noise. He looked at his phone, realizing the sound wasn't coming from it. Glancing up, he saw a system window before him. Notifications announced the failure of the ice trial and the destruction of Moscow. The next trial, the Earth trial, had a 43-day time limit, with Japan designated as the test site. Confused, he turned on the TV, where terrified journalists reported on the devastation in Moscow, now overrun by monsters. The Russian government confirmed there were no survivors. The creatures, identified as dragons, were wreaking havoc across the city. A helicopter broadcasted live footage of the destruction, and a journalist on board described the scene. Suddenly, a dragon opened its mouth, appearing to target the helicopter. Desperate cries ordered the crew to retreat, but contact was lost. The presenter in the studio, visibly shaken, called out for the journalist, only to be met with silence. A geologist on the broadcast dismissed the idea of monsters, attributing the disaster to tectonic activity. However, as the footage showed the dragon's assault, the specialist fell silent, horrified. Meanwhile, on his balcony, the protagonist watched the chaos unfold. Despite the insanity of the situation, he felt an eerie sense of calm. With absolute clarity, one thought dominated his mind. Elsewhere, a woman attempted to understand the system, pressing buttons to explore the interface. The protagonist also interacted with the system, confirming the time limit of 43 days and Japan's status as the test site. Seeing no progress made, he recalled the game's message about his experience being priceless. He concluded that the priceless assets referred to by the game were his knowledge and expertise, realizing he was the only person to have fully completed Prophecy Online. Suddenly, after a long time, his door swings open dramatically. A young man steps out, confident, with a sly grin. He declares that it's time to get his money. While running, he comments that with the game becoming real, the competition for spots and experience points will become fierce. Still sprinting, he notices the nearest dungeon just ahead. Ender dashes toward a large building, observing people frantically running and panicking, wondering aloud how they can escape since buses and trains are no longer operational. Rushing anxiously, he keeps moving until someone abruptly yells at him to stop. A man blocks his path, leaving the protagonist startled. The man asks Ender if he plans to ignore all his reminders and run off. Recognizing the man, Ender realizes it's one of the loan sharks pursuing him. The loan shark states he was on his way to Ender's house and orders him to turn around. He flicks a cigarette at Ender's face. A year ago, while inside a dungeon, Ender saw an advertisement from a company offering 200,000 yen interest-free to those who passed their selection process. However, they demanded 50% of all rewards earned. Thinking it was a great deal, Ender accepted, knowing he'd only need to repay it after completing the game. But after spending the 200,000 yen, he was informed he hadn't passed the selection. Ender was then told he'd need to repay the loan with 50% interest within 10 days. He recalls the moment a gun was pointed at him. From that day on, he began borrowing from banks to cover his debts. However, when he tried to pay, they brushed him off, letting the interest pile up. Smirking, the loan shark asks if Ender has the money to pay his debt. Annoyed, Ender retorts by questioning how he could pay if they never answered his calls. The man accuses him of lying, saying that people who don't want to pay always make excuses and calling him pathetic. Still grinning, the loan shark says he's lucky to be there for another reason. He asks if Ender hasn't been playing that game, Prophecy Online. The man points out how the current state of the world mirrors the game exactly. Grabbing Ender by the shirt, he demands to know if Ender has any useful information, warning him to spill everything. Ender coldly orders him to take his filthy hands off. Growing angrier, the loan shark questions if Ender knows who he's talking to. Ender smirks and tells Takeo he'll give him something valuable instead. Activating his skill, Novice's Fist, Ender makes the loan shark stumble back. Takeo powers up his fist by 50% and begins unleashing a barrage of punches on the man. The strikes are so powerful that the loan shark is sent flying into a traffic sign. Gazing at the unconscious and bleeding man lying on the ground, Ender remarks that from now on, he's the one in charge. Seeing Takeo incapacitated, Ender comments that it looks like the loan shark can't heal himself either. He simply leaves Taku behind and continues sprinting toward his goal. Watching from inside a car, a man in a black hood remarks that these must be game abilities. With his face partially obscured, he admits he didn't expect to encounter someone so experienced this early. Smirking, the man muses that soon law and order will crumble, making things much more entertaining. The protagonist arrives at a location called the Goat Sanctuary. Something catches his attention. He notices a car parked nearby and wonders if someone has already beaten him there. Ender begins descending into the deep, dark dungeon. Wandering through its corridors in search of something, he is suddenly struck by the strong scent of blood. To his surprise, he comes upon dozens of dead lizard men. The same hooded man and his group notice this and deduce that someone else has arrived. Looking at Ender, the man asks if he's also a prophecy player. A bit annoyed, Ender asks if the group is responsible for the carnage. The hooded man explains that those were high-level monsters, and without his intervention, Ender would already be dead. Ender questions whether the lizards were really high-level, recalling that their level is among the lowest of the low. Removing his hood, the man comments that Ender seems to have no allies, then asks if he'd like to join his group. He explains that Ender would need to give up half of his earnings but, in exchange, he'd gain protection from someone very strong. The group behind the hooded man appears charmed by his proposal. However, Ender declines, stating he prefers to work solo. Gesturing ahead, Ender asks if they even think they can get past the boss. The group looks uneasy at the thought. The hooded man speaks to his group, questioning whether it's worth sparing Ender after defeating the boss. This makes the group nervous. He coldly states that the fewer people who know about the game's secrets, the better. He decides that anyone disagreeing with him will meet an unfortunate accident. The tension in the air grows as the group begins to feel uneasy. The man informs his subordinates that the boss here is the Ember Goat and orders them to ensure Ender doesn't land the final blow. With only 5 minutes until the door opens, some of the group approaches Ender. Surprised, he notices a girl and 2 men moving toward him, looking nervous. Smiling, Ender asks if they're trying to stop him. Hesitantly, they agree, telling him he should stay put. Ender thinks to himself that he could easily throw them aside but decides to let it slide this time. As the door finally opens, Ender determines it's not too late, he'll wait for most of them to perish before stepping in to defeat the boss. Once the countdown ends and the door opens fully, he casually takes out a juice from his inventory, leaning against the wall and biding his time. Hearing the gates close behind them, Ender peers into the boss room, curious to see how far they'll manage to go. Inside, the leader notes that it's convenient Ender didn't join them. The girl suggests that perhaps Ender realized their intent to kill him, but the leader dismisses the idea, claiming he isn't smart enough to figure that out. Ahead of them lies a vast, empty hall illuminated by a single beam of light streaming through a crack in the ceiling. The light lands on the shield of one of the subordinates. The leader orders him to proceed with his role. The subordinate remarks that with his shield, the boss wasn't supposed to be a problem. Addressing the leader as Sir, someone lit a candle, its purple flames flickering in the wall sconce. Suddenly, a powerful wind gusted through the room, leaving everyone disoriented. To their shock, a massive fire tornado materialized before them. The leader, gripped with terror, began questioning what kind of situation this was. His thoughts were cut short when a large paw emerged from the flames. That's when he recognized the creature, the Hellfire goat. The monster was an unholy amalgamation of a goat, wolf, horse, and other beasts. Letting out a deafening scream, it unleashed shockwaves and flames in every direction. Warriors cried out as another devastating attack struck, sending Light and some of his subordinates crashing into the entrance door. He cursed under his breath, questioning how it had all gone so wrong, with the creature now looming over him. A frightened girl asked what they should do, and in frustration, he snapped at her to be quiet, ordering everyone to retreat. One of his subordinates shouted that the door was sealed. Impossible, the leader barked, trying to make sense of the situation. Yelling, he commanded some of them to distract the creature, insisting the shield could block its attacks. The shield bearer hesitated, trying to voice his concerns, but Light ignored him and ordered him to follow through. Reluctantly, the man positioned himself before the creature, shield raised. The beast lifted its hammer and, with terrifying force, brought it down. The shield bearer was crushed, his lifeless body sprawled on the ground. The group froze in terror as the creature bent down, picked up the man's shield with its clawed fingers, and, to their horror, began chewing it effortlessly. Unbelievable, someone muttered, pointing out that the shield was of epic-level quality. Light realized something was horribly wrong. The creature they were supposed to face was low-level, easily manageable for their team. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. He recalled the game's history and trembled as he pieced it together. This was the Hellfire goat from the original version of the game, a monster no player had been able to defeat. It hit him, this world followed the game's initial version, before any updates or adjustments. Desperate, Light remembered the protagonist, Yu, who was outside the door. Perhaps he could open it. The leader banged on the door, begging Yu to unlock it, promising to share the rewards. Predictably, there was no response. Frustrated, Light yelled for Yu to answer, but his rant was interrupted when something whizzed past him. He turned to see the monster barreling through his remaining subordinates, scattering them like rag dolls before advancing toward him. Once again, Light and his group were thrown violently, left battered and broken. Staring at the beast, he muttered about its absurd strength, realizing their annihilation was inevitable. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and Yu stepped inside. "Is that all you've got after all that bragging?" he mocked, a proud smirk on his face. He derided Light, saying he lacked the talent to lead. Still seething with resentment, Light internally cursed Yu, determined to use him to escape this nightmare. Light called out to his subordinates, ordering a retreat. Yu, however, tripped the girl as she tried to flee, casually warning her it wasn't a good idea. She fell to the ground, realizing in despair that the door was closing behind her. The protagonist looks at the so-called leader as Light dashes toward the door, desperately hoping to make it through. Suddenly, Light lets out a scream as the door slams shut, crushing his arm. The monster approaches the leader, calling him a noisy brat. Preparing to attack, it declares that the boy is irritating and it will end his life right there. Light glances back and sees the monster coming toward him. Suddenly, blood splatters across the room. Witnessing the horrifying scene, the girl and the man who tried to stop the protagonist are struck with fear, unsure of how they can face such a creature. Picking up the sword lying on the ground, Indu remarks that what needs to be done is obvious. Raising the sword, he comments that while Light was weak, at least he had a good weapon, and that's enough for someone like him. The monster, now preparing its hammer, asks if the protagonist is so eager to die. It swings with tremendous force, sending stone fragments flying in every direction. In a blink, the protagonist appears on top of the monster, ready to counterattack. Smiling, he asks the creature what it was saying. In a flash, Indu delivers swift cuts, striking the monster in multiple spots. It screams as its horns fall to the ground. Light's former subordinates watch in terror, awed by Indu's strength. Calmly, Indu turns to them and asks what they think. Once again, the cunning protagonist declares that if they pay him 10 million yen, he might consider saving them. The frightened pair look at him, unsure if he's serious. Both the girl and her companion shout, asking if he's truly demanding 10 million. Indu confirms it, adding he's only charging 1 million per person. Annoyed, they argue that no one carries that kind of money and accuse him of exploiting the situation. Indu responds that if they don't have money, they can repay him with their efforts. He asks if they really want to die so young. Finally, he proposes they work for him, giving him 90% of their earnings. The girl yells, calling him a fool, while her friend points out that even Light only charged 50%. Behind them, the monster rises again, more furious than before. It demands to know who dared to cut off its precious horns. Yelling in rage, it launches a massive fireball, shouting that they should perish 1,000 times over. The girl casts a spell in an attempt to shield herself, while the protagonist leaps through the flames. Both are thrown back by the impact, landing hard. Indu calmly lands in front of them with a grin, remarking that they managed to survive, this time. He wonders aloud how long their luck will last. Defeated and desperate, the pair agree to work for him, begging for his help. Pleased, Indu grins and declares they've struck a deal. Glancing at the monster, he adds that it's been a long time since he last defeated it. The monster, now irritated, says it doesn't recall ever losing to someone like him. The group stares, confused, as they explain that the Hellfire goat was supposed to have been removed from the game before anyone defeated it. Without responding, Indu glares at the monster with determination. He recalls how, before the update, he had defeated the Hellfire goat. He mentions hearing rumors that it had been transformed into the Blaze goat. With a single swing of his sword, the protagonist deflects the monster's attack. The creature stares in disbelief, unable to comprehend how he managed it. Indu's new subordinates watch in awe, questioning who he truly is to have stopped the creature so effortlessly. The protagonist admits to the monster that if its attack had landed, he would have been killed instantly. However, he adds that its attacks aren't dangerous once you know their patterns. The monster keeps attacking, but Indu dodges and blocks each strike with ease. The monster grows increasingly agitated, questioning how this could be happening, while the protagonist moves behind it, sword in hand. Indu manages to strike the monster in the eye, remarking that its attack patterns are identical to those in the game. Stepping away from the fray, he notices the new subordinates cheering him on, encouraging his efforts. Annoyed, Indu tells them to quiet down, prompting one of them to call him irritating. Suddenly, a powerful attack whizzes past Indu, startling him. The monster slams its massive hammer into the ground, acknowledging the protagonist's impressive evasion skills but declaring that it ends now. Cornered with his back against the wall, Indu sarcastically asks the Hellfire goat if trapping him was its plan all along. Ignoring the question, the monster demands to know his last words. With a smirk, the protagonist tells it to drop dead, taunting that it can't even land a hit. Furious, the monster vows to fulfill his wish. Summoning flames around itself, the creature opens its mouth, forming a massive core of black fire at its center. The subordinates look on, bewildered, as they wonder about the flames. Indu explains that this is the monster's ultimate attack, a flame so powerful it can kill even a level 99 player instantly. It incinerates everything, leaving no escape. With a gleam in his eye and a grin, Indu confidently says it's no big deal. He's been waiting for this moment. Activating his Nas kick skill, Indu channels just 50% of his strength, creating a blinding flash as he leaps toward the monster. He observes that while the attack is powerful, it leaves the user completely vulnerable. Furthermore, he notes that the monster's mouth is nowhere near as strong as the rest of its body. Using the ceiling for momentum, he positions himself and drives his sword downward, stabbing the monster's mouth shut. The Hellfire goat collapses, desperately trying to open its mouth as its flames consume it from within. Exhausted, Indu explains that once this ability is triggered, it cannot be stopped. There's nothing left for the monster but to succumb to the fire ravaging its body. Jumping back to a safe distance, he taunts the creature, asking if it can survive its own flames. From afar, the others watch in disbelief as the monster is consumed. Indu bids it farewell as it finally opens its mouth, letting out a dying scream. Moments later, the Hellfire goat is reduced to a charred husk. A system notification appears, confirming that the unique boss, the Hellfire goat, has been defeated. The girl and the guy, still in shock, marvel at how the protagonist emerged unscathed. The system congratulates him, announcing that he is the first player to defeat a unique boss and awarding him the title of First Slayer. Though a bit confused, as he doesn't recall such a title in the game, Indu listens as the system explains its effects, a 50% damage boost when fighting bosses. As an additional reward, he is given the opportunity to select a secondary occupation. The system warns that this choice is permanent. With determination, Indu selects the occupation of Soul Smith. Extending his arm, he makes his choice resolutely. Suddenly, a bright light envelopes his body. Smiling, he remarks that it seems he's about to make a fortune. Collecting the boss's drops, he finds a dagger and a key. The girl informs him it's the key to the underground sewer, a perfect place to quickly level up and earn money. The man accompanying her adds that their initial objective was the ultra-rare drop the boss had. Spinning the key on his finger, Indu explains that this item isn't as rare as they think. In fact, the drop rate for the Hellfire goat is 100%. They're horrified by how casually he dismisses an item that's considered so hard to acquire. Examining the dagger, he remarks it must have been pure luck to obtain it. Walking over to the rubble, Indu points the blade. Sparks of yellow and blue energy emerge. With a simple downward flick of his hand, he slices through a piece of rubble. His subordinates watch in disbelief, asking what's so special about the dagger. Shrugging, he says it's still not quite good enough. Activating his secondary occupation ability, he hopes the necessary materials will be simple to find. While secondary occupation might sound optional, Indu clarifies it's actually essential. The Soulsmith occupation allows him to use small soul fragments to create or enhance items, making it the only occupation that ensures progression to the endgame. He activates his soul sight ability and examines the dagger, discovering it can be awakened with a soul fragment from an F-type mage. Glancing at the girl, he identifies her as a mage and realizes he can extract the fragment by forming a contract without any harmful consequences. Regretting that he agreed to take only 90% of their earnings, he thrusts the dagger into the ground, saying there's still something useful to be gained. Turning to the pair, he asks if they still want the key to level up. Confused, they ask if he's really willing to give it up. Indu replies that in exchange, they'll have to provide all the items on a specific list, slightly reducing the fee they owe him. Overjoyed, they eagerly agree and thank him profusely. Indu tells them there's no need to thank him, after all, the more they earn, the more he profits. Meeting the extraction conditions, he successfully acquires the soul fragment from the F-type mage. With the required materials, Indu activates the Soul Smith ability again, commanding the sword to awaken. The blade begins to glow as fragments swirl in a tornado of energy, turning its surface a deep purple. Raising the newly awakened sword, Indu notices he's gained a new skill, Soul Slash. Testing the ability, he slashes forward, cutting through everything in his path. The attack is so powerful that it cleaves through the warehouse walls, revealing a forest beyond. His subordinates gape at the massive crater left by the strike, overwhelmed by the display of strength. Everyone stares in awe at the power unleashed by a single move. Collapsing to the ground, they wonder if such strength is even humanly possible. Examining the dagger, Indu notes that this is likely its limit. Turning to the girl, Indu says he now has a weapon and a basic set of skills, enough to take the next step. Walking toward her, he stops abruptly, causing her to flinch. Ruby quickly covers her face, thinking he's about to kill her. To her surprise, Indu walks past her without a word, leaving her confused. He crouches in front of the bodies of his subordinates' former companions and begins to pray. Ruby watches Indu intently, initially thinking he's mourning the fallen players. However, the reality is far less noble. Indu is simply looting their wallets. With a sly grin, the little thief jokes about how much money the players had on them. Both Ruby and another observer conclude that Indu is far more dangerous than the Hellfire goat. Meanwhile, black feathers fall gently from the sky, blanketing the area around a shrine. A flock of crows circles above as Indu approaches the gate. Calmly, he makes his way to a nearby well, descending the worn stone stairs. As he moves deeper, he mentions that beneath the well lies a horde of monsters, typically tackled by groups of 3 or more. However, Indu is unfazed, pointing out that he has the goat dagger, giving him the confidence to take on the challenge alone. Reaching the bottom of the stairs, he pauses to observe his surroundings. The silence is broken by the sharp sound of a coin flipping through the air toward him. Reacting swiftly, Indu slices the coin in half before it can make contact. Instantly, he assumes a battle stance, dagger poised. He glares ahead, his irritation growing as 3 men emerge from the shadows. One of them, wearing a menacing expression, mocks Indu for entering the area uninvited. He declares the space as theirs. Pointing his weapon at the group, Indu sarcastically asks who decided that. The leader smugly responds, stating that whoever arrives first gets ownership, calling it a basic rule of the game. Another man suggests they'll let Indu use the dungeon if he pays a fee. Realizing these men operate similarly to him, Indu asks for the price. They demand 50,000 yen per hour, reasoning that even with the payment, Indu would still turn a profit. Begrudgingly, Indu hands over the money, and the men thank him while informing him that his hour starts now. Venturing deeper into the dungeon, Indu arrives at the wolves' cavern. A sudden howl echoes through the space as a white wolf charges toward him. Before he can fully assess the situation, dozens of wolves surround him. Calmly, he remarks that these are diamond wolves, mid-level monsters known for being lucrative. He notes that this cave is the only place where they appear in such large numbers. Though he considers using the soul blade, he decides it's unnecessary for now. In an instant, the pack lunges at him. With unparalleled skill, Indu counters their attack, weaving through the fray and cutting down the wolves with ease. Moving gracefully, he slashes through their ranks, leaving a trail of lifeless bodies in his wake. Once the battle ends, he sits among the corpses, taking a moment to catch his breath. Smirking, he mutters that the effort wasn't as rewarding as he had hoped. Suddenly, one of the men from the dungeon's entrance appears behind him, weapon raised, ready to strike. The protagonist successfully blocks his opponent's attack, swinging his dagger in response. To his surprise, the man dodges the strike, but the attack hits the ceiling, causing a massive explosion. The enemy, with a cut on his forehead, acknowledges how dangerous that was. The protagonist observes that the man managed to avoid his attack, despite the difficulty, showing his combat skill. The player tells the big guy that he apparently chose to play dirty, as he waited for him to kill the monsters and lower his guard. The opponent grins madly, saying he enjoys it. The protagonist deduces their real goal is to wait for other players to gather gear, then kill and rob them. Overhearing this, the group leader smirks, acknowledging the protagonist figured it out. The protagonist comments that this is a secret spot used by everyone, so it would be strange if they were the only ones there. Yu says that if they wanted to deceive him, they should have at least planned a fake round. The player admits he only realized this after seeing their weapons. He notices the big guy is wearing knuckle dusters with rocket punches, risky but enhances speed. He also points out the skinny guy's sword, which cuts through vibrations, and the ring on the leader's finger, a problematic item. The leader apologizes for the misunderstanding and offers compensation for the trouble, tossing hundreds of coins toward the protagonist. Yu is startled as the coins fall, but he's also furious inside, thinking the guy is throwing 10,000 yen around carelessly. The man's ring glows as he says his hand slipped and asks you to pick up the coins for him. Noticing the trap, the protagonist asks if it's really worth making his enemy kneel. He explains that the ring's ability causes small explosions with the coins and wonders if his enemies are underestimating him. As he throws his dagger into the air, the protagonist says they can't leave alive after targeting someone of higher rank. The 3 enemies gather in front of him and ask if you forgot it's 3 against 1. Preparing his dagger, the protagonist says even together they wouldn't be worth 1 yen. Enraged, the leader curses at him, glaring fiercely. The man snaps his fingers, triggering the explosion ability. A large blast follows, and the leader orders his subordinates to dismember him. The big guy moves behind you, positioning himself to strike. With difficulty, the protagonist dodges the attack. While still in the air, something catches his attention. It's the skinny guy saying he's not very good at holding back. The protagonist blocks the skinny guy's sword while the big guy lands several punches on his back. To everyone's surprise, the player makes a single move, throwing both of them away. Looking at the leader, the protagonist says that apparently, the deal not to bother him for 50,000 yen is broken, so he'll charge them back with interest. The leader unleashes a series of attacks toward the protagonist while smiling, claiming he'll pay him back with interest. Explosive coins rain from above. Meanwhile, the skinny opponent attacks from above. With remarkable ease, the protagonist blocks the furious strike, but the attacker's confidence turns to terror as his sword shatters upon impact. Before he can grasp what's happening, the protagonist counters with another strike. Watching the scene, the leader begins to wonder if the protagonist's dagger is truly a rare item. As you fights against the three of them, the leader considers it all to be within expectations, convinced that they won't lose to someone like him. Quickly, you maneuvers to dodge the explosions again, his irritation growing as they toss money around like it holds no value. The big guy appears behind him once more, attempting to land a heavy blow. The protagonist evades the attack, triggering a massive explosion. The blast is so intense that even the big guy's allies are forced to shield themselves. The protagonist's blade spins through the air, almost signaling his defeat. Believing the battle won, the big guy begins celebrating, calling it a great challenge, while his comrade advises him to learn to hold back. The skinny one, gripping his broken sword, begrudgingly admits that the visitor was indeed powerful. Suddenly, Indu activates his soul restriction ability, binding both the skinny man and the big man in chains, leaving only the leader unrestrained and terrified. Both captured men scream in agony as the chains tighten around them, while the concerned leader shouts their names. Emerging from the mist, the protagonist explains that he used his soul smith ability to inflict unbearable pain. Enraged, the leader charges at Indu, wielding the goat dagger. Before he can even position himself, Indu grabs him, mockingly calling him slow. Furious, the leader declares that he won't lose and jumps back, unbuttoning his coat to release a flurry of coins. Confidently, the leader commands Indu to be amazed. However, Indu, now even angrier, reactivates his soul restriction ability. In an instant, the leader is completely bound in chains. He tries to scream as the chains tighten around his neck. Confused, the long-haired man doesn't understand why his ability isn't working. Indu explains that with a significant level difference, he can nullify the enemy's power. Still struggling, the leader asks what level difference Indu is talking about, revealing that he's already level 7. Tightening the chains further, Indu tells him he's done well for a beginner. Assessing them all, Indu tries to figure out the conditions needed to acquire their soul fragments. The big man's condition is to satisfy his hunger, the skinny man's is to introduce him to his older sister, and the leader's is to experience genuine fear. With a menacing glare, Indu tells the leader that his condition is one he can fulfill right now. As he strangles the leader, the man begins begging for his life. Holding the dagger, Indu explains that leaving him alive would only put him at a disadvantage. The terrified man, in extreme fear, pleads to understand what he means. Indu coldly says he could sell parts of the leader's body, as there are always buyers in the market. Smirking, he adds that the interest on the 50,000 yen loan was quite steep. The skinny man shouts that the protagonist truly seems like the type to do such a thing. Offended, Indu retorts that there's no way a freelancer like him could have black market connections. He suggests they come up with another way to make money if they don't like his idea. In complete terror, the leader begs for his life, tears streaming down his face. A system notification confirms that the leader now fears him deeply, fulfilling the required conditions and granting Indu the leader's soul fragment. With that, Indu releases them from the chains. They collapse to the ground, gasping for air. Without missing a beat, the protagonist hands them several contracts, ordering them to sign. Outraged, they protest, furious that they'll have to give up 90% of their profits and obey his every command. With a bloodthirsty glare, Indu asks if they have any complaints. Terrified, they hastily reply that they have none. He declares that from this moment, the three of them are his subordinates and warns that if they ever think of betraying him, the operating table will await them. Unexpectedly, Yu demands they lead him to their actual leader. They're completely horrified, asking how he figured it out. He explains that the items they're using couldn't possibly belong to weaklings like them, clearly indicating someone stronger is behind them. He asks if he's correct. Kaki begins begging, claiming that if their boss finds out, he'll kill them. Placing his foot on the subordinate's head, Yu coldly asks if he'll betray his boss or have his organs sold off. Shaking, the skinny man mutters something incoherent before suddenly breaking into tears and running away, shouting that he wants neither option. The big guy is stunned. Yu points at the fleeing man, questioning if he really thinks escape is possible. The soul restriction chains reappear, capturing the man mid-run. His two companions are petrified by the display of dominance as their friend is suffocated. Trembling, they agree to lead him to their boss, but Yu also demands all their weapons and money first. The protagonist observes that security in this world is abysmal, sarcastically remarking that unnamed security was better. Smirking, he laughs, claiming that no one can hurt him now. In his status window, it's clear that Yu is operating on an entirely different level. As the sun sets, the scene shifts to a circus. Like any circus, there's a tightrope walker performing alongside rings of fire and other spectacles. Beneath the big top, a man is seen beating someone viciously. The victim collapses to the ground, bloodied. Inside a makeshift cell, others watch with dread, muttering that they'll be next. One prisoner expresses sorrow for the victim. A man with a bloodied face tells the beaten individual he failed the task and asks if he wants to apologize to the boss. Another captive shouts, pleading for the violence to stop, warning that the victim will die. Wearing a sadistic grin, the man retorts that death is deserved, claiming they're all nothing but burdens to the boss. Suddenly, someone holding a whip interjects, asking why they're discussing him. The sadistic man immediately stammers, addressing him as boss. The boss, his face painted like a clown, approaches and chastises his subordinate for being too harsh. Helping the bloodied man to his feet, the boss remarks that if bones were broken, recovery would take too long. He reprimands the sadist, emphasizing that, no matter how incompetent they may be, his subordinates shouldn't break their tools. Nervously sweating, the sadistic man grovels and apologizes profusely. Tears in his eyes, the beaten man begins thanking the boss, promising he'll do better next time. Before he can finish, the clown cracks his whip, striking the man's face with devastating force. The clown continues lashing him, stating that this method is preferable, it doesn't break bones but flays flesh instead. Still attacking him, the boss mocks that even animal welfare organizations wouldn't assist him if he stays this lazy. Suddenly, a voice announces that they've returned, catching the boss's attention with a sinister glare. He remarks that they're back too soon. The long-haired man explains they need to report in, as they're in no condition to continue the mission. The clown notices his hand and realizes the ring is missing. He becomes furious, staring at Key. The boss demands to know where the ring is, saying it's worth more than his life. The long-haired man bows, apologizing and explaining that they were robbed by a man who was practically a monster. Ignoring his explanation, the boss strikes him down, causing him to fall from the impact. Enraged, the boss says that even with such a small guild, he shouldn't be surrounded by such incompetent fools. Both of Kuki's companions admit that most left because of his abuse of power. The boss declares there's only one task left that Kuki can do and orders his other subordinate to lock the clown in place. Suddenly, a large white tiger's paw appears, moving toward the long-haired man. The tiger growls at him furiously. Stammering in fear, the long-haired man pleads with the boss, claiming he's been loyal from the start. The clown smiles and gives the order to let the tiger feast. The tiger opens its mouth, ready to strike Kuki, who stands frozen in fear. Out of nowhere, someone swings in from one of the circus apparatuses. It's the protagonist, who saves his new subordinate by kicking the tiger away with incredible strength. He sends the animal flying. The boss, concerned for his tiger, looks at it while shouting its name. The protagonist, smiling, apologizes but says he couldn't allow him to kill his source of income. The boss rushes to his animal, asking if it's alright and expressing concern over its fright. Desperate, Kuki asks why Ndu took so long to show up, but the swindler only complains that there wasn't much to loot. Unexpectedly, the boss attacks him from behind with his whip. However, to his shock, the protagonist cuts the whip with ease, even with his back turned. In the blink of an eye, the boss is left without his whip, which falls to the ground in pieces. Nervous and frightened, the clown asks who the protagonist is as his blade glows purple. Ndu responds that he's the new boss of the group. Locke, outraged, starts demanding where their gratitude for the boss is. The men ask why they should be grateful, explaining they only obeyed him out of fear. Now, they believe the protagonist is far scarier. Staring down Locke, the protagonist asks if he's hurt the men in the cages. He says that if they sign a contract, he'll protect them from this weakling. One of the men, who was just attacked, asks if the protagonist will take them out of this hell. With a malicious grin, the protagonist confirms. He announces that he'll only take 50% of everything they earn. His other subordinates, angered, complain about the high percentage, but he simply says it's because they tried to kill him. Trembling with rage, the clown demands to know if, aside from hurting his animal, the protagonist also plans to steal his subordinates. His eyes glow purple as he vows to kill all four of them. Ndu responds, saying they're in Japan and asks when such barbaric behavior became acceptable, pulling an ID from his inventory. The clown explains his authority by holding up a guild master ID and a certificate from the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications. Surprised, the protagonist realizes he's a guild master. The clown elaborates that the Japanese government grants guild leaders the power to act above the law to conquer dungeons, noting that not even the police can interfere. Andre comments that in Japan, those with power face no consequences. Grinning, Yu asks if being a guild master would allow him to conduct shady business without repercussions. The clown sneers, calling him foolish, and grabs a gun, explaining that one must be at least rank B to become a guild master. Pointing the weapon at Yu, the clown declares that he'll kill him, claiming he doesn't need to know anything else. Firing his gun, the guild master vows to turn you into a sieve. However, you calmly raises his soul barrier, an ability requiring level 25 and type E magical soul fragments. As the bullets ricochet harmlessly off the barrier, the clown curses and reluctantly praises you, calling him clever. You counters, remarking that Russia used nuclear missiles during the ice test and still failed. He taunts the guild master, asking why no players use firearms if they're so effective. Panicking, the guild master shouts for you not to approach, but a powerful shock from the barrier causes him to drop the gun. The barrier presses forward, slowly crushing the clown against the wall, causing it to crack. The man spits blood as you laughs triumphantly. When the barrier dissipates, the guild master collapses to the ground, powerless. You mocks him, stating that abilities far surpass weapons and that Andre should never have thought toys like guns could defeat him. Watching their leader's defeat, the former subordinates murmur that even the boss was powerless against you. Smiling, you offers them a deal. If they agree to his terms, he'll let them take revenge. Desperate, they accept, agreeing to his contract as long as they can deal with their fallen leader. The guild master weakly asks how you, a man without a license, managed to do this, warning that the authorities won't stay quiet. You dismisses the threat, reminding him of his own words, power is everything. As he lays defeated, the clown hears footsteps. Looking up, he sees all of his former subordinates approaching. They begin beating their boss as you watches, calculating the profits he made from the ordeal. He muses that they'll bring him even more wealth in the future. Checking the system window, you concludes it's time to finish the test while the situation is still chaotic. He notes there's only a month left, calling it the perfect moment. At the headquarters of the Player Association, the rank certification exam is underway. You arrives to take the test, overhearing a conversation between three people behind him. One says that becoming a rank B player guarantees a high salary in the tens of millions of yen. Another warns not to get his hopes up, pointing out that only 1% of Japan's population reaches rank B, and just 9 individuals are rank A. The group continues their conversation while the protagonist listens silently. Endo notes that it has been 2 weeks since the game became reality. The government had offered a 100 million yen reward to anyone who could end the trial, but the results were disastrous. Now, registering with the Player Association is mandatory. Without it, participants can't claim any rewards. As Endo walks toward the association, he considers the significant money at stake and thinks about getting a share. However, he senses someone watching him from above. Searching for the observer, an object suddenly flies toward him. Effortlessly, he dodges the attack. Onlookers murmur in shock, noting that a traffic cone fell from the sky. It's Takwa, a loan shark, who taunts Endo, shouting that he won't escape his debt so easily. Endo dryly asks if the loan shark came to take the exam too, mocking him by saying that someone weak enough to be defeated by the novice fist ability should give up on being a player. Takwa retorts, claiming he's changed and now holds the strongest class, Spearman. Endo laughs, dismissing Spearman as a beginner's class for amateurs who don't understand the game. Takwa demands to know Endo's class, and with a sly grin, Endo responds that he's a novice. Takwa bursts out laughing, mocking him for essentially being classless. Internally, Endo admits his main class is indeed novice but decides not to mention his secondary class. Raising the traffic sign again, Takwa declares he'll get revenge and demonstrate the true power of a spearman. He unleashes a flurry of attacks, but Endo casually dodges them, closing the distance. Panicked, Takwa demands to know how Endo can move like that. Facing him directly, Endo explains he didn't want trouble before the exam but can't help it when problems find him. With a single motion, he flings Takwa into the air, causing panic among onlookers. As Takwa crashes to the ground, screaming, Endo brushes off the situation, calling it self-defense before continuing on his way. Inside the luxurious Player Association building, the receptionist informs Endo that the registration fee is 8,000 yen, which he finds unreasonably expensive. Later, as he sits, dejected about the loss of his money, a girl approaches him, smiling apologetically for the delay. She announces that the rank certification exam is about to begin. Endo is led to a massive black rock emitting a strong purple light. The assistant explains the exam, and Endo asks if he needs to touch the rock. As his hand nears it, several rays of light connect to him. Moving closer, a powerful blue light flares, and the moment his hand touches the rock, a massive explosion of light occurs, startling even the assistant. Rays of energy and an intense glow emanate from the stone as everyone looks on in shock. In another room, the assistant, still astonished, calls Endo's name and announces his result. He is equivalent to rank A. Handing him the classification document, she nervously explains that players can change their class and suggests options like Master Swordsman, Master Mage, or Archbishop. Endo declines, explaining that his desired class isn't available yet. Confused, the woman asks what class that is, but he refuses to share. She then informs him that class changes require a special item and offers the association's assistance, which he coldly declines. A bit uneasy, the assistant asks if his decision won't cause problems. Endo questions her concern, and she explains that despite his unmatched power for rank A, his lack of a class means he'll be downgraded to rank E. She notes that rank E comes with significant restrictions, such as being unable to form his own guild, which could be a disadvantage for him. Endo remarks that the government loves creating pointless rules while thinking to himself that all he needs to do is promote a subordinate to rank B. He recalls that only one class can clear this game, and he's not planning on changing that anytime soon. The protagonist then asks if even a rank E can claim the 100 million reward for clearing the test. She confirms, and Gon explains that his registration will need to be issued as rank E. Later, walking down the street, the protagonist notices people holding up posters, trying to recruit individuals who've just finished the test. Smiling, he observes the effort they're putting into it. Two girls approach, looking for rank D players and asking if he wants to join their guild. Yu informs them that he's rank E, and the girls begin to lament, understanding his rank. He notices that rank E players are treated poorly but convinces himself he doesn't care. Suddenly, his attention is drawn to a man in a suit walking through the crowd, surrounded by an orange aura. His eyes glow orange as he locks eyes with Endo. The man introduces himself and asks if his name is Ri, handing him a card with details for a guild called Genesis Wings. People nearby speculate if Genesis Wings is the strongest guild and wonder if this man is the Stinker. The protagonist asks what Stinker means, and the man awkwardly explains it's his nickname in the game. Realizing the man is famous, the protagonist wonders if befriending him could be profitable. He asks Shinji what he wants, but their conversation is interrupted by the lone shark, who asks if the Stinker is looking for him. Teiko, the lone shark, approaches and claims that despite being a rank B player, he won't be influenced by bad decisions. The protagonist wonders if this weakling is truly rank B and suspects he might have threatened the examiner. Shinji asks who the man is, and the lone shark angrily calls him a little girl. Teiko gets enraged, grabbing the man by his tie and threatening him, claiming he's strong. However, with one swift movement, the man easily twists Teiko's arm, forcing him to his knees in pain. A bit more seriously, Shinji says that with the world's end drawing near, they don't have time to waste on this. Teiko storms off angrily, telling Shinji not to cry and to try recruiting him later. The man apologizes to the protagonist for the disturbance, but Endo says it's fine since Teiko was also a nuisance to him. The protagonist asks what Shinji wants, assuming someone like him wouldn't have anything to say to a rank E. Shinji laughs, calling him humble, and says that the only reason Endo is rank E is because he refused to change classes. Laughing, the protagonist comments that the association is quite loose-lipped. Shinji, a bit awkward, says that with Japan's end approaching, they can afford to lower their guard. Shinji then offers the protagonist a deal, asking what he thinks about working with them. He offers the same amount they paid for information, handing Endo a check for 10 million yen. Shocked, Yu remarks that it's an amount he had some time ago, but internally he's desperate for the money. He hands the check back, saying he's not interested in joining any guild. Shinji observes that strong people really don't settle for less. The Stinker then makes another offer, asking if Yu isn't interested in the information they have. He claims his guild is supported by government agencies and other guilds worldwide. The protagonist asks if they could find out who the player was that completed prophecy online. Smiling, Shinji says it's impossible since no one has completed the game. Irritated, the protagonist declares he'll decline, and Shinji, afraid after seeing his reaction, backs off. He hands Endo a piece of paper, saying that if he changes his mind, he can contact him. As the man leaves, he wonders why he gave up so easily. He questions if he was worried about ruining his guild's reputation by pushing too hard, but he concludes it wasn't that. Shinji confesses that he was terrified, as if every part of his body told him not to cross paths with such a monster, almost making the Stinker soil his pants. The protagonist pats him on the shoulder and hands him a piece of paper, leaving the man even more perplexed. He tells him that if he ever needs help, he can call, and depending on the amount, he might accept. Nervously taking the paper, the man thanks him for his kindness, still unsure of what just happened. Shinji wonders, in his disoriented state, who the protagonist really is. Later, at the headquarters of Genesis Wings Guild, someone hurries down the hallway to the top floor. Feeder enters the guild master's office, formally announcing his return. The master suddenly turns around, revealing herself as a woman. She asks how his meeting with the newbie, deemed the strongest by the association, went. Still a bit nervous, Shinji admits that the protagonist is genuinely a monster. Trembling, he admits that the protagonist was the only player who made him feel fear during their conversation. With a terrifying look, the guild master asks who is stronger between her and the protagonist. Shinji hesitates, stammering. She says she'll take his silence as an answer while looking at the protagonist's file. Shinji, still nervous, apologizes, but she tells him not to, as his job is simply to relay all information without hiding anything. The guild master explains that among the 10 transcendent players, she is the lowest ranked and that it's not surprising there are people stronger than her. She goes on to explain that the 10 transcendent players are the best from the Prophecy Online test, those who receive a cash prize. In a world where the game has become a reality, the appearance of someone powerful disrupts the power hierarchy. She notes that since Shinji returned alone, it means the negotiation failed. He confirms that the protagonist isn't interested in the information they possess, let alone the 10 million yen offered. With her arms crossed, the guild master says that if the protagonist is indeed one of the 10 transcendent players, fame and wealth will come to him naturally. She observes that there's no way someone from the 10 transcendent players could remain a rookie voluntarily. However, she also mentions that there are hidden items with great power, but they come with side effects. She advises Shinji to continue assessing the protagonist with his own eyes, as if his assessments are correct, the protagonist will surely become the strongest in the world. The guild master adds that, in any case, the strongest person in the world could only be one of the 10 transcendent players whose identity remains unknown. Shinji nervously asks if she's referring to the first place. He informs her that even the United States is searching for data on the top 10 players, but the number 1 slot is corrupted. The guild master suggests that the United States might be hiding the number 1 player secretly in their country. Shinji says he believes the rumors, but after meeting the protagonist, he remembers their encounter and now thinks it's very likely that the protagonist is number 1. The guild master agrees, stating that if Shinji is saying this, it's likely true. She looks out the window and orders Shinji to inform all members that hostile actions against the protagonist are strictly prohibited. She compares him to a nuclear bomb, one whose explosion time is unknown, and must be handled with care. Shinji, still nervous, promises to do as instructed. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, in another large building, Endo says it's been a few weeks since they began searching for hideout locations for their source of income. As he looks out at the view, one of his subordinates calls out to him. They are positioning a TV and ask for his opinion. Kaki steps forward, presenting a suitcase full of money, saying he managed to collect the day's taxes. The protagonist praises him and asks how the attack group's preparations are going. Kaki reports that they're easily leveling up in the underground sewers and making 1 million yen a day. Excitedly, he informs the protagonist that even the new recruits are making 100,000 yen per day. The long-haired man says he never imagined making so much money, thanking the protagonist. The player reminds him that he promised to make them money, and as they profit, so does he. He explains that the taxes are essentially fees for the information. Kaki thinks to himself that paying 90% is a lot, but without the information, he wouldn't even make 10%. Looking at the protagonist, he realizes that this man has valuable knowledge. The long-haired man asks what they should do about the judgment, as there are only 10 days left, and the reward is already at 400 million yen. The protagonist replies that he will wait a little longer. Suddenly, Endo's attention is caught by the TV, which is broadcasting something important. It shows the location of the test and states that if it's not completed in 10 days, Japan will be destroyed. Another presenter adds that, like before, the situation seems hopeless, but his colleague shares new information. The Japanese government has announced they will pay 1 billion yen to whoever completes the test. The player, observing the announcement, comments that if they delay too long, foreign guilds might try to intervene. Picking up a piece of clothing, he says that now is the best moment to act, stressing that he will go out for a bit. The long-haired man asks if he's going alone, and Yu confirms, saying that he can't put his source of income at risk. Everyone is fascinated by him, but then his 171 personality takes over, and he says, "It's 1 billion yen, and for that, I'll take everything." Kaki snaps back to reality, realizing it's all about the money. It's already night when the protagonist arrives at the test location, where many people are gathered in front of the gate. Shinji notices his presence, and as always, the player is calm, as if he were simply going to a market. Happy, Feeder asks if you really came, and the protagonist replies that he has no intention of cooperating. However, Shinji says it's a shame, as he wanted to strike a profitable deal with him. He offers 100 million yen for you to transport some items. This catches the protagonist's full attention. Shinji leads him to a space filled with hundreds of backpacks. He asks you to take one of the backpacks to his members inside the test. Curious, Yu asks what's inside them that makes them worth 100 million yen. Shinji responds that they contain provisions. Opening one of the backpacks, Yu sees that it's full of supplies and asks what this is, with Shinji explaining that these are the guild master's favorites. Shinji goes on to say that they're in the deepest layer of the test, and due to that, they're running low on provisions. With a smile, the protagonist asks what the issue is, as with that amount, many people would accept the task. Embarrassed, Shinji admits that they're in a difficult situation. He reveals that he had asked 39 groups to help, but all of them were annihilated. The player begins to speak, saying the first 4 layers should only be formalities, and wonders if it's different from the game. Still nervous, Shinji concludes that you must know something. Shinji clarifies that as far as they know, the test is the same as the game, but most people can't reach the 5th layer. Everyone who makes it to the 5th layer is waiting for supplies. He adds that only you and his guild master are the ones who could call the 4th layer a formality. While picking up the backpack, the protagonist asks if they are really that sure about their manpower situation. Either way, he's still making money. Looking at Feeder, he asks if he'll get a reward if he delivers it quickly. As he grabs his phone, Shinji says he will talk to his superiors. Watching the man talk on his phone, Yu wonders how much money he could make with them. Shinji informs him that if the delivery is made within a day, they'll add an additional 50 million yen. Suddenly, Shinji heard a noise. It was the protagonist. Turning quickly, he mentioned that he would be there in an hour. Inside the test's 3rd layer, a group of people were battling a giant insect. The man, struggling against the monster's attacks while pinned to the ground, urged the woman to run, even if it meant doing so alone. She cried out to him, begging him to come with her. The man smiled, turned to thank her, and told her to go. She screamed his name, reaching for him, but unexpectedly, the protagonist sliced through the insect, telling it they were in his way. The man collapsed in shock, unable to comprehend how he was still alive as the monster's body crumbled around him. His wife thanked the protagonist, but in a blink of an eye, he was already gone, leaving them behind, still puzzled about what had just occurred. The protagonist sped through the cave at an insane pace, and they were left wondering if he was already gone. He finally reached the 5th layer, halting his sprint. Indu realized it hadn't even been an hour and concluded that the 150 million yen would certainly be worth it. But suddenly, something caught his attention. A man approached and asked if he was Indu. The protagonist placed the backpack down and asked if the man was from Genesis Wings, to which the man confirmed. He explained he had delivered the provisions Shinji had requested and that the payment had already been transferred to his account. Opening his bank app, Indu saw that 150 million yen had indeed been deposited. Satisfied, he thanked the man for the deal. As various players appeared, their leader informed them they had been waiting for food for a long time. They started to divide the provisions, relieved they were finally saved. One player mentioned informing the line. The protagonist noted that it seemed dreadful, and the leader agreed, saying they had already lost many members. Suddenly, panic spread as people began running, shouting that they would be caught. As they neared the camp, they thought they were safe, but then a loud noise echoed through the cave, causing everyone pain. They turned to see a large cloud of smoke rising, and to their shock, a massive swarm of giant insects was charging toward them. The protagonist prepared to attack when, out of nowhere, a huge flame passed by him, incinerating all the insects. The guild master appeared, burning the creatures and stopping to sheath her sword, her blade still surrounded by flames. The insect bodies fell to the ground, charred beyond recognition. You recognized that she had used a high-level secret skill, elemental sword, Hellfire. The guild master walked up to him, saying it was a pleasure to meet him. She thanked you for delivering the provisions and introduced herself as the guild master.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this recap, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more manhwa recaps every week. Hit that bell icon so you never miss the latest chapters and stories from your favorite manhwa series.